Dad stopped the car at the Grayford Airport arrivals curb. As I reached for my suitcase, my sleeve hitched up, revealing the white hospital wristband. The stamped letters were faded but legible. Stepmother beat me. Dad met my eyes in the rearview mirror, and in that instant, his perfect family, her admirable company, and my entire life veered onto a new path. My name is Eden Cole. I am 31 years old, and my profession is compliance. The air inside the Grayford Municipal Airport terminal was chilled to a precise, inorganic cold that had nothing to do with the October weather outside. It smelled of industrial-grade disinfectant, burnt coffee, and the faint, anxious sweat of 1,000 strangers in transit. Overhead, the ventilation system hummed a low, constant drone, a mechanical mantra that vibrated in my bones. Every sound was sharp, amplified by the cavernous space and the polished terrazzo floors. The rhythmic squeak and grind of suitcase wheels, a symphony of plastic on stone, was punctuated by the disembodied, echoing voice from the PA system, calmly announcing gate changes and final boarding calls for flights to cities that felt like they were in another universe. A baby cried somewhere to my left, a thin, piercing wail that was quickly shushed. A man laughed too loudly into his phone, his voice booming with a false bonhomie that grated on my raw nerves. I stood near the glass doors of Arrival Section B, a carry-on bag at my feet, and a laptop case slung over a shoulder that ached with a deep, resonant throb. The pain was a grounding presence, a physical anchor in the surreal detachment of the last 24 hours. I had just returned from a 3-day, on-site compliance audit at Raven and Pike Foods in Chicago. It was the kind of meticulous, soul-numbingly dull work I excelled at, cross-referencing shipping manifests with inventory logs, reviewing access control protocols, and ensuring their hazard analysis and critical control points plan was documented to the letter of federal law. I spent 72 hours submerged in the world of processing regulations and supply chain integrity, a world of clean lines, verifiable data, and clear, unambiguous rules. It was a world that made sense. It was a world I could control. Then I came home. Through the tinted glass, I saw the familiar silhouette of my father's charcoal gray SUV pull up to the curb. Arthur Cole. He navigated the chaotic arrivals lane with the unhurried confidence of a man who believes the world will bend to his intentions. He was a good man, a decent man, a man who had built his life on the bedrock of predictable outcomes and quiet integrity. He put the vehicle in park, and a warm, genuine smile spread across his face as he saw me. It was the smile he'd had for as long as I could remember, the one that reached his eyes and crinkled the skin at their corners. It was the smile of a father who was simply, uncomplicatedly happy to see his daughter. I walked through the automatic doors, the conditioned air giving way to a gust of exhaust-tinged autumn wind. The change in atmosphere was a physical shock. I opened the rear passenger door and began to lift my suitcase in. "Here, let me get that, Edie," he said, his voice warm. "I've got it, Dad." I swung the small roller bag onto the leather seat, and in that motion, the cuff of my blazer slid up my forearm. It was an insignificant movement, one that happened 100 times a day, but this time, it was different. This time, it revealed the stark white plastic band cinched around my left wrist. My father's smile didn't fall. It froze. It was as if a switch had been flipped, a circuit broken. His eyes, which had been warm and welcoming, narrowed with a sudden, sharp focus. He wasn't looking at my face anymore. He was staring at my wrist. It was a standard-issue hospital admission bracelet from the Grayford General Emergency Room. Put on me less than 12 hours ago, the plastic was stiff, its edges still sharp. My name, Eden Cole, and my date of birth were printed in a blocky, impersonal font. But below that, in the space designated for preliminary notes, a triage nurse with neat, steady handwriting had recorded the official mechanism of injury as I had described it to her. Her voice a monotone of professional calm while she checked my pupils. The gray ink was slightly smudged from the sleeve of my coat, but the words were still perfectly, horrifyingly clear. My father leaned over the center console, his body straining against the seatbelt. He squinted, his brow furrowed in a mask of disbelief and confusion. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't have to. He was reading it. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. It was a fragile, cracked sound, stripped of all its earlier warmth. "Edie, what is that? What happened?" He was still looking at the bracelet, as if the words themselves were a language he couldn't comprehend. I met his gaze in the rearview mirror, my own expression carefully, deliberately neutral. The dull ache in my ribs flared, a sharp reminder of the truth I was holding back, the truth I had to deploy with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "What happened at home?" he asked, his voice lower still, imbued with a nascent dread. This was the first critical move, the first piece on the board. My answer had to be perfect. It had to be a lie that was also a truth. "At the office," I said. My voice was level, calm, the voice of a compliance officer stating a fact. His eyes flickered from the wristband to my face in the mirror, searching for something, a crack in my composure, a hint of emotion. I gave him nothing. I had spent years learning to be a blank slate, a repository of facts and procedures. My face was just another document, redacted and controlled. He didn't press, not yet. He sank back into his seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He stared straight ahead through the windshield, at the endless parade of cars and travelers. But I knew he wasn't seeing any of it. He was seeing those words. He turned the key in the ignition, and the engine rumbled to life. The car's infotainment screen lit up, and the radio, tuned to the local NPR station, filled the sudden, cavernous silence. And the Aurelian Group today announced a record-breaking contribution to its corporate wellness fund. A polished, professional voice announced. Speaking at a press conference, Chief Human Resources Officer Cambria Vale emphasized the company's commitment to a people-first culture, stating that employee well-being is the ultimate metric of success. The name hit the air in the confined space of the car with the force of a physical blow. Aurelian Group, my employer, the company whose reputation was as meticulously crafted as its balance sheet, and Cambria Vale, my stepmother, the architect of that reputation, the CHRO, the woman who had built an empire on the vocabulary of empathy, wellness, and care, the woman whose signature was on the wellness fund, the woman whose fist had cracked my rib. I saw my father flinch, a small, almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. The radio host continued, her voice bright and admiring, lauding the philanthropic initiatives Cambria had pioneered. It was a flawless piece of public relations, a testament to a lie so large, so bright, it blinded everyone. Instinctively, I reached over with my right hand and pulled the sleeve of my blazer down, concealing the white plastic band. The gesture was meant to be reassuring, a silent signal to my father to drop it, to let it go, to pretend we hadn't seen what we had both just seen. "I need to stop by the office before we head home," I said, my voice cutting through the radio anchor's smooth narration. "I just need to drop something off." My father seemed to shake himself out of a trance. He turned his head and looked at me directly for the first time since he'd read the wristband. His face was pale, his eyes filled with a storm of confusion and a fear I hadn't seen in him since my mother's final days in the hospital. "Edie, no," he said, his voice firm but strained. "Whatever it is, it can wait. You look exhausted. Let's just go home." Home. The word was an absurdity. The place he thought of as home was the scene of the crime. This was the second move, the point of no return. "It can't wait," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. I reached into my laptop bag, my fingers closing around the small, cold object I had guarded for the entire flight from Chicago. I pulled it out and held it up in the space between the front seats. It was a simple USB flash drive, silver and nondescript, a tiny vessel for an ocean of truth. "It can't wait," I repeated, my voice dropping to a whisper, forcing him to lean in to hear me. "Because she has a board of directors meeting tonight." He stared at the flash drive, then back at my face, The confusion in his eyes began to recede, replaced by the slow, dawning horror of understanding. The dots were connecting, forming a constellation he had never wanted to imagine. A car in front of us braked suddenly, and my father hit our own brakes. The SUV came to a smooth stop. The red glare of the other car's taillights flooded the cabin, bathing everything in a crimson glow. The light caught the white plastic of the hospital band on my wrist, which my sleeve had failed to completely cover. It was no longer just a piece of medical equipment. In the bloody light, it looked like what it was: evidence, a living exhibit. My father's breath hitched. He looked from the wristband to the USB drive, and then to my face. The silence in the car was no longer empty. It was dense, heavy, suffocating. It was filled with the weight of 5 years of willful blindness, of polite family dinners that were elaborate performances, of a carefully constructed facade that was about to be brought down by one small piece of plastic and one small piece of metal. The car behind us honked, a short, impatient blast. My father took a deep, shuddering breath. He didn't say a word. He pressed his foot on the accelerator. The SUV surged forward, leaving the airport behind. We merged onto the highway, the city skyline rising in the distance. The silence remained, a solid, unbreachable wall between us, as heavy and cold as concrete. The silence in the SUV was a living thing. It was heavier than the recycled air, thicker than the tinted glass that separated us from the blur of highway traffic. My father's hands were rigid on the wheel, his knuckles pale peaks in the dim light of the dashboard. He hadn't spoken since we left the airport, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, as if it were the only solid thing left in his world. The radio was off. The only sound was the low hum of the tires on the asphalt, a steady, monotonous drone that matched the throb in my side. I looked at my father's profile. Arthur Cole, a man who built bridges, literal ones, of steel and concrete, that spanned rivers and canyons. He was a man of physics, of load-bearing capacities and stress tolerances. He believed in tangible things, in blueprints and verifiable data. He believed in what he could see. And for 5 years, he had seen exactly what Cambria Vale wanted him to see. Aurelian Group, from the outside, especially here in Braxton Vale, it wasn't just a company, it was a civic institution, a beacon of progressive capitalism. The campus was all glass and reclaimed wood, nestled in a manicured park that was open to the public on weekends. Its marketing materials, plastered on billboards and in glossy magazine spreads, didn't talk about profit margins or market share. They talked about holistic growth and community impact. They promoted Aurelian as an extended family. At the head of this family was the CEO, a charismatic figurehead, and right beside him, the matriarch, the heart of the operation, Cambria Vale, my stepmother, the chief human resources officer. Cambria was the architect of the Aurelian Way. She was the one who had coined their shining mantra, "People first," a slogan now etched into the frosted glass of every conference room. She was the driving force behind the company's celebrated culture of care. She personally oversaw the portfolio of employee wellness initiatives that had won Aurelian countless awards and fawning press coverage: yoga retreats, mindfulness apps subsidized by the company, on-site nutritionists, sleep pods with ambient soundscapes, a corporate wellness fund that was legendarily generous, a bottomless well of resources dedicated to ensuring every employee felt seen, heard, and cared for. It was a beautiful, gleaming edifice of compassion, and Cambria was its chief designer, its most vocal evangelist, its living embodiment. I first entered this company, 6 years ago, straight into the legal department. I was quiet, meticulous, and comfortable in the weeds of contract law. I was good at my job. Then, a year later, my father, still hollowed by my mother's long illness, met Cambria at a city fundraiser. He was vulnerable. She was a supernova of polished empathy and curated warmth. She didn't just console him, she healed him, as he'd told me once, his voice thick with gratitude. She organized his life, reignited his social calendar, and filled his house with bright flowers and the sound of laughter. He owed her his resurrection. He fell in love with the woman who rebuilt him. They were married within a year, and shortly after the honeymoon, my new stepmother called me into her new, expansive office on the 28th floor, the one with the panoramic view of the Braxton skyline and the living wall of vibrant, recycled moss. "Eden, darling," she'd said, her voice like warm honey. She never sat behind her desk for these conversations. She preferred the intimate armchair grouping, forcing a proximity that always felt like a violation of my personal space. Legal is so adversarial, isn't it? It's all about what if things go wrong, she smiled, a bright, practiced expression that didn't touch her eyes. I see you in a role that's more constructive, more aligned with our people-first mission. 2 weeks later, I was transferred. I was promoted. In fact, to head the newly formed Internal Compliance Department. It was a lateral move disguised as an elevation. "We need someone with your precision," she'd explained to my father over dinner. "Someone to really measure our processes, to make sure our wellness and integrity goals are being met. You're leveraging her greatest strength. Arthur, it's perfect." And so I was moved from the world of law, which has teeth, to the world of compliance, which, in most corporations, is seen as a bureaucratic backwater. I was no longer a lawyer. I was a process measurer, a box checker. She had taken me off the chessboard and placed me in the box with the scorecards. She thought she had neutralized me. She had, in fact, given me the keys to the entire kingdom. She had given me a mandate to look at everything. Our new family life became a performance. Dinners at the house, at least twice a week, were no longer simple meals. They were curated events. They felt like press conferences. My father would talk about his latest project. Cambria would share a glowing anecdote about an employee she had personally uplifted, and I would be prompted to confirm how smoothly the new compliance dashboards were running. The wine was always expensive, the food always photogenic. Cambria would often pause, holding her glass up, to get the perfect shot for her Instagram feed. "A quiet family night," the caption would read, projecting an image of domestic bliss and professional harmony that gathered thousands of likes. In those moments, I learned to be silent. I learned to smile, to nod, to be the perfect, supportive, slightly dull daughter. I became an expert in blending into the neutral-toned, sustainable fabric-covered furniture, and while I smiled and nodded, I watched, I listened, and back at my office, in the quiet, overlooked corner of the 19th floor, I began to build a file. It started small, an email here, a vendor approval there. I wasn't a lawyer, but I still had a lawyer's mind. I understood discovery. I understood the power of a documented chain of evidence. I tracked the flow of money. I logged metadata. I cross-referenced invoices. I noted the way Cambria's signature appeared on approvals that should have required a secondary sign-off. I saw how she used the overwhelming goodwill of her people-first narrative to bypass the very processes I was hired to measure. No one questions the angel of wellness. No one demands receipts from the CHRO who just gave a keynote on corporate integrity. My father saw none of it. He was happy. He was in love with the woman who, in his eyes, had saved him. He saw her public triumphs, her charity galas, her radiant smile in the society pages, and he was proud. He saw a loving wife who doted on him and a supportive stepmother who had promoted his daughter. How could I tear that down? How could I tell this man, who had already lost one wife to the slow, agonizing cruelty of disease, that his second wife was a fraud? I didn't argue with him. I didn't present my suspicions. That would have been a mistake. He would have seen it as bitterness, as jealousy. He would have chosen her. So I didn't fight. I planned. The first true crack in the glass appeared 6 months ago. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. It was an anomaly, a rounding error in a sea of data. I was auditing the expense reports for the Wellness Fund, the crown jewel of Cambria's programs. Among the hundreds of legitimate entries, yoga instructors, mindfulness app subscriptions, catering for health seminars. There was a single reimbursement, a payment to an LLC I didn't recognize, Aurelian Wellness LLC. It was a strange redundancy. Why would the Aurelian Group's wellness fund be paying an external entity with Aurelian in its name? It was a sloppy mistake, the kind of oversight a person makes when they believe no one is capable of looking. I pulled the incorporation papers for Aurelian Wellness LLC. It was a shell company, registered to a PEO box in Norcrest, a town 2 states over. The listed administrator was a name I didn't know, but a quick search revealed it to be Cambria's sister-in-law. That was the first crack. From there, the entire facade began to splinter. I followed the money, one payment to the LLC, then another, and another, all for large, round-numbered sums, all approved by Cambria herself, all vaguely described as strategic wellness retreats or employee mindfulness modules. I cross-referenced the dates of these payments with Cambria's personal calendar, her corporate credit card statements, her travel logs. The wellness retreats perfectly matched the payment schedule for her nephew's lavish wedding at the Stonehill Lodge, the deposits for the venue, the caterer, the floral designer. It all came from the Aurelian Wellness LLC, which was funded exclusively by the People First Employee Wellness Fund. She was embezzling. It was clean, simple, and utterly brazen. She was stealing from the very employees she claimed to champion, using their well-being as a cover to fund her family's lifestyle. I compiled everything: the bank transfers, the incorporation documents, the wedding invoices from Stonehill Lodge, which I obtained by posing as a prospective client, the email chains where she directed her HR subordinates to approve the payments without unnecessary red tape. It was all there, a perfect, airtight case. I was ready to hand it over to my external legal counsel, to let them present it to the board's independent chair. I had a plan. And then, 2 nights ago, I made a mistake. I got impatient. I was working late, in the house, in the small ground-floor laundry room I used as a makeshift office to escape the staged perfection of the main house. I had the final 2 documents open on my laptop: the bank transfer confirmation and the wedding caterer's invoice. They were the final, damning link. The door opened, and she was there. Cambria. She wasn't in her usual CHRO armor of a power suit and a bright smile. She was in silk pajamas, her face bare of makeup, but her eyes were sharp, alert. She saw the laptop screen. She saw the 2 documents side by side. Her voice, when it came, was not the warm, honeyed tone she used in public. It was a low, cold hiss. "What are you doing, Eden?" I didn't lie. "I'm looking at the payments from the Wellness Fund to your LLC." For a second, she just stared, and then, the mask of the caring matriarch didn't just slip. It evaporated. The crack in the glass, the one I had been tracing for months, suddenly became a gaping, jagged hole. And then that hole, that void of all her feigned compassion, slammed directly into my ribs. The physical impact was shocking. A bright, searing explosion of pain that stole my breath and sent me careening into the sharp metal edge of the washing machine. It was fast, brutal, and efficient. The crack wasn't just in the company's financials anymore, it was in my bone. One night, the crack slammed into my ribs, and in that moment, the entire case changed. It was no longer just about white-collar crime. It was about violence. It was about survival. And it was about a small, white plastic bracelet, printed with the words that would bring it all down. The laundry room was on the ground floor, tucked away behind the kitchen, a small, sterile box insulated from the rest of the house. It was my sanctuary, my ad hoc office. The only sounds were the rhythmic, heavy thud, thud, thud of the dryer tumbling a load of towels and the hiss of the rain against the small, high window. The air was thick with the acrid, chemical smell of chlorine bleach, a scent so sharp it felt like it was scouring my lungs, overlaying the damp, loamy smell of the storm outside. It was just after 10 p.m., 2 nights ago. My father was asleep upstairs. I was sitting on a hard wooden stool, my laptop balanced on the folding counter. On the illuminated screen, I had two windows open, side by side. On the left, a PDF of an expense reimbursement from the Aurelian Corporate Wellness Fund for a senior management mindfulness retreat, paid to Aurelian Wellness LLC. On the right, a scanned copy of an invoice from the Stonehill Lodge, detailing a wedding reception and catering package for Mr. and Mrs. K. Vale Sorensen, Cambria's nephew. The dates were identical. The amounts, to the dollar, were a perfect match. The mindfulness retreat was the wedding deposit. I leaned in, my finger tracing the invoice number on the screen. This was it, the final, undeniable link, the keystone that locked the entire structure of her fraud into place. I clicked my phone's camera, capturing a high-resolution image of the screen. I had the originals, of course, secured on multiple encrypted drives and with my external counsel, but I was documenting the moment of synthesis, documenting my own thought process. What a dedicated employee, working so late. The voice was soft, almost sweet, but it sliced through the rhythmic thud of the dryer like a razor. I didn't jump, I simply froze. The air in the room, already cold, dropped several degrees. I turned slowly on the stool. Cambria was standing in the doorway, framed by the warm light of the kitchen hall behind her. She was in a pale blue silk robe, her hair pulled back, her face scrubbed clean of its daytime mask of makeup. She looked softer, more domestic, which only made the hard, Arctic glitter in her eyes more terrifying. She smiled. It was a thin, tight expression that held no warmth, only a kind of curious menace. Her eyes flicked from my face to the laptop screen. She didn't need to step closer to see the documents. She knew exactly what they were. "Eden," she said, her voice a low, intimate purr. "What are you doing? Are you doing something for the company? Or are you doing something against it?" She was offering me a way out, a chance to lie, to close the laptop, to pretend, to choose ignorance and safety. I turned back to the screen. I clicked on the wire transfer confirmation. Then I clicked on the LLC's incorporation papers, the ones listing her sister-in-law as the sole administrator. I let her hear the clicks of the trackpad. "I'm looking at your signature," I said, my voice as flat and sterile as the room. "The one you used to approve the transfer of $75,000 from the Employee Wellness Fund to Aurelian Wellness LLC, a shell company you established in Norcrest." I turned to face her again. "The mindfulness retreat was your nephew's wedding." The silence that followed was absolute. The dryer stopped its tumbling, falling into a low, electronic hum. The only sound left was the rain, lashing harder against the glass. Cambria's expression didn't change, but a small muscle in her jaw twitched. The pretense was gone. The board game was over. We were in a different territory now, a place of cold, physical reality. "You are," she whispered, a strange, almost impressed lilt in her voice. "So much more meticulous than I gave you credit for." "I'm in compliance," I said. "It's my job." "Your job," she repeated, tasting the word. "Your job is to measure process. Eden, not to draw conclusions. You've drawn a very, very dangerous conclusion." She took a step into the room. The smell of her expensive floral perfume cut through the bleach. "You'll delete that," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. "It's already logged," I replied. "It's already been transmitted." This was a bluff, but a necessary one. Her eyes narrowed. "Transmitted where?" As if on cue. My phone, resting on the counter beside the laptop, buzzed. The screen lit up. We both looked at it. It was a calendar notification. An automated alert from the corporate secretary. Subject: urgent and confidential. Special meeting of the board of directors. Date: tomorrow, October 20th, 7:00 p.m. It was the meeting I had requested through back channels, via the independent board chair, citing urgent governance and compliance irregularities that required immediate board-level attention. I had set the trigger. And now, Cambria was seeing the gun being cocked. Her face, which had been a mask of cold control, contorted into something primal. It was a flash of pure, undiluted rage. So fast I barely had time to register it before she moved. She didn't lunge at the laptop. She lunged at the phone. "No," she snarled. Her hand shot out, not to grab the phone, but to grab my wrist, to stop me from touching it. Her fingers were like steel bands, crushing the delicate bones. She twisted, hard, simultaneously. She used her other hand to sweep the phone off the counter. But her momentum was wrong. She was all rage, no calculation. As she twisted my arm, she yanked me off the stool. I fell forward, and she shoved me, using my own weight against me. It all happened in less than a second. My body slammed into the sharp, unforgiving right-angled corner of the Maytag washing machine. The impact was not a dull thud. It was a sharp, percussive, definitive crack. It wasn't the sound of metal. It was the sound of me. My vision didn't just blur. It exploded. A universe of white, blinding static filled my head, and the world dissolved into pure, agonizing sensation. The air was punched from my lungs in a silent scream. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. The only reality was the white-hot electric bolt of pain that had just pierced my right side. I collapsed to the tiled floor, curling into a fetal position, my arm clutching my ribs. The cold, damp tile was a shock against my cheek. Through the roaring in my ears, I heard the clatter of my phone skittering away under the dryer. I gasped, trying to pull in a breath, but the movement sent a fresh wave of blinding pain through my chest. My vision swam back into focus, grainy and tunneled. Cambria was standing over me. She wasn't even breathing hard. She was looking down at me not with anger, but with a frigid, profound disgust. She hadn't just assaulted me, she had swatted a fly. She nudged my laptop with her bare foot, sending it sliding off the counter. It hit the floor with a sickening crunch of plastic. She then knelt, not to help, but to get closer. Her face was inches from mine. The floral perfume was suffocating. "You will let this go. Eden," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "You will say you slipped. You will say you were tired. You will stop this, because if you don't, what I just did to your rib will be nothing compared to what I do to your life." She stood up, smoothed her silk robe, and walked out of the laundry room, not even looking back. I lay on the floor for a long time. The only sounds were the rain and the small, wet gasps I was making, each one a fresh agony. Eventually, the pain subsided from a blinding white light to a deep, dark, relentless ocean of throbbing. I moved, bit by bit. I used the wall to pull myself up. Every movement was a negotiation with the broken bone in my side. I retrieved my phone. The screen was cracked, but it worked. I left the laptop. It was a casualty. But it was irrelevant. The data wasn't on it. It was in the cloud, in escrow, in my head. I crept out of the laundry room, through the dark kitchen, and out the side door into the driving rain. The cold was a mercy, numbing my skin. I didn't go to my car. I walked, stumbling, down the driveway into the house next door, the one with the porch light always on. I rang the bell until my neighbor, a kind, elderly woman, opened the door, her face a mask of sleepy confusion that quickly turned to horror. I remember saying only one thing. "I fell. I think I'm hurt. I need help." She called 911. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, and the detached, calm voices of people who see the worst of human nature every night. They were efficient, cold, and professional. They cut off my shirt. They gave me an injection that turned the sharp, stabbing pain into a dull, manageable ache. They took me for X-rays, the technician's gentle hands positioning me in ways that still felt like torture. Afterward, a triage nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense expression, sat by my gurney in the ER bay. She had a tablet in her hand. "Okay, Eden, the doctor will be in to confirm, but you have a non-displaced fracture of the 10th rib. We need to document the mechanism of injury for the report." She looked up, her gaze steady. You told your neighbor you fell, but the bruising pattern isn't consistent with a simple fall. So I'm going to ask you, officially, what happened? This was the moment. I could have said I fell. I could have lied. I could have let her go. But my profession is compliance. My currency is fact. The truth is a non-negotiable requirement. I looked at her, my voice hoarse from the pain. I was in my home. I confronted my stepmother about financial malfeasance at our company. She grabbed my arm, and she shoved me. I struck a washing machine. The nurse didn't blink. She just typed, her fingers moving quickly over the screen. So, the injury was the result of an assault?
Yes.
By your stepmother, Cambria Vale?
Yes.
She nodded, finished typing, and stood up. I'll be right back. She returned a minute later with a small, portable printer and a plastic band. She printed the label. She wrapped the white plastic band around my left wrist and snapped it shut. Don't get it wet, she said. The doctor will be in with your discharge papers and pain medication. I looked down at the band. There, under my name and date of birth, were the words, printed in faded gray ink, the official, unchangeable, documented truth. I left the hospital just before 5 a.m., against medical advice. The rain had stopped, and the air was cold and sharp, smelling of wet pavement and the promise of a dawn that was still an hour away. I walked out of the automatic doors holding a large manila envelope containing my x-rays and a prescription for painkillers I had no intention of filling. The pain in my side was a cold, hard fact. The plastic bracelet on my wrist was a second fact. The USB drive in my pocket, which I'd had on me the whole time, was the third. I had boarded a 7 a.m. flight to Chicago for my audit at Raven and Pike Foods, the one I'd scheduled weeks ago. I needed the time. I needed the distance. I needed to be gone when she realized I hadn't just gone to the hospital. I had gone to war. I sat on the plane, a mask of professionalism, while my ribs screamed and my mind plotted. I worked the audit for 3 days, and now I was back, and my father was here to pick me up. My title is Head of Internal Compliance for the Aurelian Group. This is not a glamorous role. It is not a position of power in the way Cambria understands power. She operates in the realm of influence, of narrative, of charisma. I operate in the realm of provable fact. My world is one of regulations, statutes, and the unyielding binary logic of internal controls. My tools are not persuasion or charm. They are the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, specifically Sections 302 and 404. They are SEC Rule 10b-5, which makes it unlawful to defraud or deceive in connection with the purchase or sale of a security. My tools are the company's own code of conduct, its vendor approval protocols, its segregation of duties matrix, and its access control logs. To Cambria, these things are bureaucratic nuisances, red tape to be cut by the sharp shears of her people-first authority. To me, they are the bricks. My job is to be a mason, to take these disparate, boring, technical bricks and lay them one by one, with perfect precision, until they form a wall of truth so solid, so heavy, and so structurally sound that it cannot be ignored, bypassed, or torn down. I had been laying these bricks for a long time. My first attempt was orthodox. 6 months ago, when I confirmed the existence of the Aurelian Wellness LLC and the first 2 suspicious payments. I followed protocol. I filed a confidential report through our third-party whistleblower hotline. This is the correct channel. It is designed to be anonymous and to go directly to the audit committee of the board of directors. A week later, I received the official response, delivered through the same encrypted portal. The matter has been received and is being reviewed by the Office of the CHRO. They had forwarded my complaint to Cambria, the system I was meant to trust. The very safeguard I was supposed to use was designed to protect her. She had built it. The independent hotline was a funnel, leading right back to her desk. The official sanitized feedback I received 2 weeks later was a masterpiece of corporate deflection. After a thorough internal review, the vendor has been validated as a key partner in our wellness initiatives. The payments are in accordance with approved budgets. We consider this matter closed. The review was delayed and then dismissed. That was when I knew I could not use the company's tools to fix the company. They were her tools, so I would have to use my own. I began to build a second, parallel structure, a dead man's switch built of pure data. I started creating a trail of breadcrumbs, a term we use for a log of evidence so subtle it's invisible to the perpetrator, but perfectly clear to an investigator. I didn't just download files that would trigger alerts. Instead, I ran searches within the system and took screenshots. I compiled email chains, but I wasn't just interested in the text. I was interested in the metadata. The X-header information showing the email had originated from Cambria's home IP address, not her office. The read receipts showing an HR subordinate had opened and approved a multi-$1,000 invoice in under 3 seconds, an impossibility if any review had actually been done. I went into the back end of our Enterprise Resource Planning (ERP) software. I found the vendor file for Aurelian Wellness LLC, and then I found the edit history. The vendor had been entered, approved, and moved to preferred status by a single user ID, CVAL. She had bypassed the mandatory 4 eyes principle, the rule that one person creates a vendor and a second, independent person approves it. She had violated the most basic tenet of Sarbanes-Oxley, the segregation of duties. But data can be changed. A corrupt administrator could go in, delete the logs, and it would be my word against hers. I had to prove that the data I'd found was real and unaltered. For every single file, every PDF, every email, every screenshot of an ERP log, I ran a checksum. I created an SHA-256 hash for each document. This is a cryptographic function, a 64-character alphanumeric string that serves as a unique, unforgeable digital fingerprint. If a single comma in a 300-page document is changed, the hash algorithm will produce a completely different string. I took these hashes, these digital fingerprints, and I put them in a text file. I then took that text file, encrypted it, and uploaded it to a private, third-party digital escrow service. I did this weekly. I was creating a time-stamped, provable archive of my investigation, completely outside the Aurelian network. I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was creating a provable timeline of when I collected it and certifying its integrity. This was the data. But data alone is not enough. I needed a human component. I used the 2-person rule, a concept from nuclear launch protocols. One person alone cannot turn the key. I vetted 3 different law firms before I found the right one, Rook & Calder. They were small, boutique, and specialized in forensic accounting and corporate governance disputes. They had teeth. I paid the retainer from my own savings. I met with a senior partner, a woman named Maeve Harlan, who would later become the independent chair of the board. But at this point, she was my private counsel. I am an officer of a publicly traded company, I told her, my voice level in her sterile, quiet office. I am in possession of information that points to significant financial malfeasance, wire fraud, and a material weakness in internal controls, originating from a C-suite executive. I cannot report this internally. The channels are compromised. I handed her a sealed, tamper-evident envelope. This contains a summary of my findings and a hard drive. I am not asking you to open it. I am retaining you to hold it, to act as a witness to its existence as of today's date. She understood immediately. What are the terms of release? You will open this and act on its contents, specifically by contacting the independent members of the board of directors, under one of 2 conditions, I explained. First, if I provide you with a specific passphrase. Second, if I fail to check in with you via secure email for a period of 72 consecutive hours. She nodded, her face impassive. The dead man's switch. The compliance protocol, I corrected her. That was phase 1, the data. Phase 2, the legal. Phase 3 became necessary 2 nights ago, the medical. After I left the hospital, my mind was running on pure, cold adrenaline. The pain was a physical fact, but I had to translate it into a legal one. The ER report was a good start, but it was a clinical document. I needed a forensic one. Before I flew to Chicago, I made a call. I found a clinical forensic physician, a doctor whose specialty is not just treating trauma, but interpreting it for a court of law. I booked an appointment for the day I returned, under a false name, and paid in cash. While I was in Chicago, supposedly auditing food processing plants, I spent my lunch break in a sterile medical office. The doctor, a precise woman with a camera and a measuring tape, documented everything: the bruising on my wrist, the exact shape and location of the contusions on my side. She took high-resolution photographs. The injury pattern, she dictated into her recorder, her voice a detached monotone, is consistent with a high-velocity, focused impact against a hard, angular edge. The contusions on the wrist show evidence of a forceful grip and twist motion. The findings are not consistent with a simple fall, but are highly consistent with the patient's report of being forcibly shoved into the corner of a home appliance. I had her seal a copy of her report, complete with the photographs and her signed affidavit. This, too, was sent by messenger to Rook and Calder, to be added to the sealed package. With all the pieces in place, I activated the PIN. From my hotel room in Chicago, I used a secure, anonymous email address to contact the lead independent director, Maeve Harlan, who I had first met at Rook and Calder and who had since been appointed to the board. I didn't use my name. I didn't make accusations. I simply stated the facts in the language of our profession. Subject: urgent. SOX Section 404. Notification: body. A material weakness in internal controls over financial reporting has been identified, directly impacting the integrity of the Q3 P&L. Segregation of duties has been repeatedly compromised by a senior executive, resulting in misappropriation of corporate funds from the employee wellness budget. Full documentation is available and will be presented upon request. Immediate board-level intervention is required per the Audit Committee Charter. This language: material weakness, SOX, misappropriation, is a corporate nuclear bomb. It triggers personal, legal, and financial liability for every single board member. They could not ignore it. They would not ignore it. The special meeting was called within hours, and I had one final trap: the full data package, the LLC papers, the bank transfers, the wedding invoices, the ERP logs, the forensic medical report, was encrypted in a single file. The link to this file was in the meeting invitation, but it was locked. It could only be opened with a one-time password. That password, I explained in my anonymous email, would be sent to the independent directors only after the meeting had been formally called to order and all attendees, including Cambria, were present. She would be walking into the room, but she would be walking in blind. All the pieces were ready: the digital evidence, the legal framework, the medical verification, and the corporate mechanism for the meeting itself. It was a perfect interlocking machine, a trap built of data, law, and procedure. It was all set. It was cold. It was technical. It was complete. It was only missing one thing: a human catalyst. It needed a spark. I had planned to be the spark myself, to present the data with cold precision. But what happened in the laundry room changed that. The assault wasn't just a crime. It was a gift. It provided the narrative, the emotional weight that the cold data lacked. And I knew, as I sat on that plane, that the first person who needed to feel that weight was my father. All the pieces were in place. All they needed was a single, visceral trigger to set them in motion. That trigger was my father's eye, catching mine in the rearview mirror. It was his gaze falling on the white plastic bracelet. It was the moment the abstract, the fraud, the lies he'd chosen to ignore, became a physical, undeniable reality, a reality printed in smudged gray ink on his own daughter's skin. The catalyst was here, and we were on our way to the office. My father drove for another 10 minutes in that crushing silence before he pulled over. He didn't park on the shoulder of the highway, but exited onto a quiet, tree-lined suburban street, the kind of place where nothing bad is ever supposed to happen. He cut the engine. The sudden absence of the low tire hum was a shock. making the silence in the car feel absolute, like the pressure in a deep-sea trench. He turned in his seat, the leather creaking under his weight. His face was a gray, drawn mask. The anger and confusion had settled into a deep, hollowed-out dread. "Show me," he said. His voice was a rasp. "Show me everything." This was the moment, the deposition. I didn't reach for the USB drive. Not yet. That was for the board. For him. I had the source documents. I took a steadying breath, the movement sending a dull, familiar ache through my right side. I pulled my laptop from its case. My personal laptop. Not the one Cambria had broken. I powered it on. The screen illuminated our faces with a cool, blue-white light. I didn't editorialize. I didn't frame the narrative. I am a compliance officer. I present findings. Fact 1, I said, my voice as level as if I were in an audit meeting. 6 months ago, I identified a new vendor in the Aurelian ERP system, Aurelian Wellness LLC. The entity was created and approved by a single user, C. Vale. This is a primary violation of Sarbanes-Oxley segregation of duties protocols. I clicked open the first file. It was a screenshot of the ERP vendor log, with Cambria's user ID and the timestamp highlighted in a neat red box. My father leaned over the center console, his eyes scanning the technical jargon. He might be a bridge builder, but he'd run his own firm for 30 years. He understood what a single user approval meant. Fact 2, I continued, closing the log and opening a new file. The company is registered to a PIO box in Norcrest. The listed administrator is one Catherine Breyer. I don't know that name, he said, his voice rough. She is Cambria's sister-in-law, I stated, the wife of her brother, Michael. My father flinched. A small, sharp movement, as if he'd been stung. Fact 3. I opened the next file. It was a consolidated bank statement for Aurelian Wellness LLC, which I had legally subpoenaed through Rook and Calder. The LLC has received 11 wire transfers from the Aurelian Group Employee Wellness Fund over the past 6 months, totaling $482,000. All 11 transfers were approved, again, by a single signatory, Cambria Vale. I clicked on the detail for one of the transfers. The image of the scanned authorization form filled the screen. There was her signature, a flamboyant, confident scrawl, and below it, the beneficiary account name. My father read it aloud, his voice barely a whisper. Pay to Aurelian Wellness LLC, beneficiary, Cambria 5. He sank back into his seat, a low, guttural sound escaping his throat. It was the sound of a physical blow. He stared at her name on the screen, the name of his wife, the name of a thief. It could be a mistake, he said, but the words were hollow, a desperate prayer from a man whose faith was crumbling, a clerical error. Fact 4. I didn't acknowledge his comment. I simply moved to the next piece of evidence. I opened a new folder. It was filled with invoices. These are the payment descriptions for the 11 transfers. They are all coded to employee mindfulness or executive wellness retreats. I opened one, a payment for $75,000. Then I opened a second window next to it. It was the invoice from the Stonehill Lodge for the wedding of Cambria's nephew. The wellness retreat, May 12th, I said, pointing to the line item on the Aurelian expense report, was paid on the same day the deposit for the wedding venue was due. I pointed to the second screen. The amounts are identical. I repeated the process. A mindfulness module in June matched the payment for the wedding caterer. A strategic offsite in July matched the invoice for the floral arrangements and the string quartet. One by one, I laid the bricks. Her nephew's perfect wedding day, paid for by the money set aside for the health and well-being of the employees she claimed to cherish. My father said nothing. He just stared, his face ashen. The man who built structures designed to withstand earthquakes was watching the foundations of his own life turn to sand. He was a man of evidence, and the evidence was irrefutable. The wall of belief he had built around his wife wasn't just tilting, it was collapsing in on him. Finally, I closed the financial files. I took the large manila envelope from my carry-on bag. Fact 5, I said, my voice softer now. 2 nights ago, in the laundry room, she saw me reviewing these documents. She demanded I delete them. I refused. My phone received the notification for the board meeting. She grabbed my wrist, and she shoved me into the washing machine. I pulled the single, large sheet of film from the envelope, the X-ray. I held it up. Even in the dim light of the car, the image was starkly clear. The elegant, curved lines of my ribcage, and on the right side, the tiny hairline fracture, a thin, dark line, a fissure, a crack in the bone. My father reached out, his hand trembling. He didn't touch me. He touched the X-ray. His fingers, calloused and strong from a lifetime of work, traced the image of my broken bone with a tenderness that was almost unbearable. He followed the line of the fracture, as if by touching the image, he could somehow understand the reality of the violence. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. He withdrew his hand and looked at me. His eyes filled with a pain that went deeper than my own. "Edie," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Are you sure you'll be safe, going in there, to the meeting?" Ooh. His first thought was not of the money, the company, the betrayal. It was for me, for my safety. "I won't be making accusations, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I will be stating facts. I will present the findings of an internal compliance review. I am just telling the truth, in a place where the truth is recorded in the official minutes." He nodded slowly, processing this. The distinction was critical. This wasn't a family drama. It was a governance failure. "The board meeting is tonight?" he asked, his mind shifting from the personal to the strategic. "At 7, I confirmed. "And there's something else you should know. Deloitte, the company's external auditors, are on site this week for their quarterly review. Their main team is set up in a conference room on the 15th floor. Right now." His eyes widened. He understood the implications immediately. An allegation of executive fraud with the auditors in the building was not a spark. It was a forest fire. The board couldn't contain it, even if they wanted to. They would have a legal fiduciary duty to disclose it to the auditors. The clock was ticking. He stared out the windshield for a long moment, at the quiet, peaceful street. Then he looked at me, his decision made. "We're not going home," he said, his voice low and hard, infused with a cold anger I hadn't heard in years. "We're not waiting for 7 o'clock. We're going to the office. Now. We will go directly to Maeve Harlan's office. You will present this to her, with me as a witness. Maeve Harlan, the independent chair of the board, the lawyer from Rook and Calder. The right choice." He took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind a man takes before he dives into icy water. He looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears, with 5 years of misplaced trust. "If this is true, Edie," he began, his voice breaking. "All of it. Then I've been blind." I reached across the console and, for the first time, I put my hand on his arm. "No, Dad," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "You weren't blind. She blurred you." He looked at me, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. I had not blamed him. I had given him the truth of his situation. He was not a fool. He was a victim of a master manipulator. He nodded, a final, sharp movement. He turned the key, and the engine roared back to life, loud and angry in the quiet street. He pulled away from the curb, not with his usual calm deliberation, but with a new, raw urgency. We drove towards the city, towards the glass and steel tower of the Aurelian Group headquarters. As we approached, he didn't head for the visitors' parking. He swiped his executive access card, and we turned down the ramp into the underground garage. The heavy rolling steel door began to rise in front of us with a low mechanical groan. It revealed a cavern of concrete and fluorescent lights, a stark, subterranean world beneath the gleaming facade of the company. The door opened slowly, like the mouth of a pit, waiting to swallow us whole. Maeve Harlan's office on the 32nd floor was a world of cool gray stone, glass, and silent, expensive carpet. It was the office of a woman who wielded power not through volume, but through precision. She was the board's independent chair. And her face, as she sat behind her vast, empty desk, was an impenetrable mask of neutrality. My father stood by the window, a silent, heavy presence. I sat opposite her, my personal laptop plugged into the large monitor on her wall. "You have my attention, Ms. Cole," Maeve said. Her voice was as cool and gray as the room. "And you have my father's," I added. "Then let's begin the audit," I said. I hit the first key. A click, the screen lit up with the Aurelian Group's approved vendor list. "Exhibit A, the entity," I said. "Aurelian Wellness, LLC, registered in Norcrest, Delaware, a state known for its corporate secrecy." Click, the LLC's Articles of Incorporation. "Administrator, Catherine Breyer." Click, a simple, public social media profile. A photo of Cambria and a woman, arms linked, smiling. The caption, "So wonderful to have my sister-in-law, Catherine, in town." "The administrator," I stated, "is a direct family relation." Maeve's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. "Exhibit B, the transactions." Click, a new screen, a spreadsheet I had built from our internal payment system. 11 wire transfers, made over 6 months, all to the LLC. You'll note the amounts. I pointed. $40,000, $75,000, $28,000. Round numbers, a primary red flag for fraudulent activity. Click, the description field for all 11 transfers, side by side. The stated purpose, copy-pasted for each, employee mindfulness module or strategic wellness retreat. Exhibit C, the correlation. Click, a new file opened. It was a PDF of a contract with the Stonehill Lodge, a luxury wedding venue. The client, Mr. and Mrs. K. Vale Sorensen, Cambria's nephew. I highlighted the total cost and the payment schedule. Click, a split screen. On the left, the Stonehill contract. On the right, my spreadsheet of wire transfers. 8 of the 11 transfers to Cambria's LLC, I said, my voice a monotone. Match the wedding payment due dates to the day. The wellness retreat for $75,000 on May 12th was, in fact, the deposit for the venue. The mindfulness module in July was the caterer. Click, here is booking reference 904B from the Stonehill contract. And here, I opened the internal Aurelian memo. Is the same reference number, 904B, on the justification form for the wire transfer, which Cambria herself signed. Maeve leaned forward. This was more than suspicion. This was a direct link. "But the most compelling evidence," I said, "is digital." Click, I brought up a log file. The Stonehill Lodge contract was signed electronically. I subpoenaed the IP data from the e-signature provider, the IP address that executed the contract. I highlighted the number. Traces directly to the 28th floor of this building, specifically to the unique static IP address assigned to the CHRO's office. My father made a low, pained sound. Maeve held up a hand to silence him. She was focused on me, on the data. Exhibit D, the cover-up. Click, an email chain, an HR payroll clerk, doing her job. Emailing Cambria. "Hi Cambria, accounts payable is asking for detailed, itemized invoices for these wellness vendor payments before they can release the next check." Click, Cambria's reply. Sent 3 minutes later. "This is a highly sensitive employee health initiative, due to the confidential nature of the participants' medical and mental well-being. We are not to request detailed breakdowns. Process the summary invoices as is. This is a CHRO directive." I looked at Maeve. She used employee privacy as a shield to hide her own theft. She instructed a subordinate to bypass a primary financial control. Exhibit E, the systemic breach. Click, the ERP audit log. This is the control log from January 10th, when our new ERP system went live. A 3-tier approval process for all vendor payments over $25,000. Standard procedure. Click, a new log, dated January 12th, 2 days later. Here is user ID C. Vale, accessing the control parameters, and here is the log of her action. manually removing the third-level executive review requirement for all payments coded to the Wellness Initiative Cost Center. The justification she entered in the log? I zoomed in on the text. Process optimization. I closed the file. She didn't just break the rules. She rewrote the rulebook so she couldn't be caught. Exhibit F. The law. Click. A simple black and white text slide. A direct violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, Section 404, Internal Controls, a material weakness in financial reporting, a deliberate and systematic violation of the company's own segregation of duties policy. She was the requester, the approver, and the beneficiary. Using a shell corporation, she approved payments to herself. The room was silent. The financial case was closed. Now, for the rest. Exhibit G. The assault. Click. The screen filled with high-resolution images. My right side. A mottled pattern of deep purple and yellow bruising. My left wrist, with the clear imprint of fingers. This is the clinical forensic report I commissioned yesterday. The medical expert's conclusion. Trauma is consistent with a high-velocity, focused impact against a hard, angular edge. Bruising pattern is not consistent with a simple fall. Exhibit H. The corroboration. Click. A sworn affidavit from my neighbor. She attests to me coming to her door in distress on the night of October 18th. Click. This is the timestamp from her 911 call. Logging the incident at 10:19 p.m. Click. And this. I brought up a grainy, time-stamped video file. Is from my neighbor's security camera, showing me exiting my house at 10:18 p.m., clutching my side, just before I rang her bell. The timeline is precise and verified. Exhibit 1. The integrity. Click. The final screen. It was a long, complex list of 64-character alphanumeric strings. These are the SHA-256 hashes for every document you have just seen, generated at the time of their discovery, and this, I held up a single, sealed envelope from Maeve's own former law firm, is the confirmation from Rook and Calder, dated 3 months ago, acknowledging receipt of a sealed, encrypted hard drive containing the initial financial findings. The chain of evidence is complete, forensically sound, and has been independently witnessed. I closed the laptop. The big screen went black, plunging the room back into its dim, gray light. I slid the small silver USB drive, the one I'd shown my father in the car, across the polished desk. It stopped perfectly in the center, in front of her. This drive contains everything you just saw, the full, explosive package. It has been sent to the other independent directors, appended to the invitation for tonight's special meeting. I paused. It is, of course, encrypted. They cannot open it. You cannot open it, not yet. The one-time password will be sent to your phone simultaneously, only after the meeting is called to order. All attendees are confirmed present, and the minutes are being recorded. I met her gaze. She will have to be in the room. She will watch you all open the file, blind, at the exact same time. There will be no warning, no chance to spin the narrative, just this, just the facts. The 28th floor boardroom was a terrarium of glass and steel, suspended over the darkening Braxton Vale skyline, the city lights, just beginning to glitter, reflected in the vast, polished mahogany table, creating a disorienting illusion of two skies, one above and one below. The air was cold, chilled to a precise temperature that discouraged comfort. The board directors, those present in person, sat in their high-backed leather chairs, an archipelago of grim-faced power. The others, their faces pixelated and slightly out of sync, watched from large vertical monitors that stood like electronic sentinels at the far end of the room. My father and I sat not at the main table, but in chairs placed against the glass wall, the position of observers, of petitioners. He was a statue of gray granite, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap they were bloodless. I was a coiled spring, my entire being focused to a single, sharp point. The dull ache in my rib was a metronome, counting down the seconds. Maeve Harlan, the independent chair, sat at the head of the table. Her face was impassive, her presence an anchor in the silent, charged room. "This special meeting of the Aurelian Group Board of Directors is now called to order," she stated, her voice cutting through the stillness. The time was 7:02 p.m. "The minutes will reflect that all directors are present, in person or via secure teleconference. As per the notice of this special meeting, all personal electronic devices must be powered down and stored, no exceptions." There was a series of small clicks and movements as phones were put away. "The corporate secretary will note," Maeve continued, her eyes scanning each face, "that this meeting is being recorded in both audio and video, as per the company's governance protocols for special investigations." A small, unobtrusive red light glowed to life on the wall. The trap was set. The recording was live. The main door to the boardroom opened with a pneumatic hiss. Cambria Vale entered. She was a vision in smoke blue, a custom-tailored suit that was soft in color but sharp in cut. Her hair was perfect. Her smile was a high-wattage beam of confidence and warmth. She was not walking into an ambush. She was, in her mind, arriving to take control. She carried an embossed leather portfolio and radiated an aura of effortless command. "Maeve, everyone," she said, her voice like warm honey, gliding to her seat at Maeve's right hand. "I'm so glad we could all connect. I know this was last minute, but in today's demanding climate, prioritizing our collective governance and, of course, our mental well-being is just paramount, isn't it?" She saw me and my father against the wall. Her smile didn't falter, but a flicker of annoyance, of confusion, passed through her eyes. Why was the help here? "Cambria, thank you for joining us," Maeve said, her voice flat, devoid of any returned warmth. "We are here to address the urgent compliance and governance matter I flagged this afternoon." She looked at the directors. "You will all find a secure folder in your board portal. The one-time password has just been delivered to your work tablets. Please open the file now." A series of unified dings echoed softly in the room as the tablets received the code. Cambria frowned, opening her own device. "A password? Maeve, what is all this?" "Ms. Cole," Maeve said, her gaze shifting to me. I stood up. The movement was stiff, my muscles rigid. "As the head of internal compliance, you have the floor." Every eye in the room swiveled to me, Cambria's, still smiling, but the smile was now a tight, curious grimace. "Thank you, Madam Chair," I said. My voice was steady. I had rehearsed this. "I addressed the board today in two capacities. First, in my official role as head of internal compliance, to report a series of critical findings. Second," I paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing them to lean in. "I speak as a medically documented victim of a violent assault perpetrated by the Chief Human Resources Officer." The silence that followed was not empty. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and polite pretense from the room. The faces on the monitors froze. My father's eyes closed. Cambria's laugh was sharp, a bark of disbelief. "Maeve, what is this? Have we lost our minds? This is absurd." I ignored her. I turned to the main screen, clicking the remote in my hand. "The file you are now opening contains the full evidence package. I will summarize." Click. The main screen lit up. It was not a spreadsheet. It was a simple, brutal flowchart. A box labeled Aurelian Employee Wellness Fund sat at the top. An arrow pointed down to a second box. Aurelian Wellness LLC. Admin. K. Breyer. CHRO relative. From that box, a thick red arrow pointed to a third. Stonehill Lodge and various wedding vendors. "For the past 6 months," I said, my voice narrating the diagram, "our CHRO, Cambria Vale, has been systematically defrauding this company. She created a shell LLC, violated all SOX controls by naming herself the sole approver for payments to that entity, and funneled nearly $500,000 from the Employee Wellness Fund. That money was used to pay for her nephew's wedding." "This is a lie!" Cambria's voice was a shriek. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently on the floor. This is a malicious fabrication. Slander. Maeve, this is beneath the dignity of this board. She pointed a shaking finger at me. Eden is unwell. She has been for some time. She's unstable. This is a pathetic, desperate, poisoned attempt for attention from a deeply disturbed young woman. I am appalled this is being given airtime. I did not look at her. I did not engage. I simply held my left hand up, my sleeve still covering my wrist. Slowly, deliberately, I unbuttoned the cuff of my blazer, then the cuff of my shirt. I folded the fabric back. 2 precise folds. The white plastic hospital band was stark against my skin in the cold. Artificial light. I looked at the corporate secretary. Please log this as Exhibit G. With a steady hand, I unclasped the plastic snap. I took the band off my wrist and laid it flat on the polished mahogany table in front of me. The small plastic click as it landed was the loudest sound in the room. "What is that?" one of the directors on screen asked. "It is my admission bracelet from the Grayford General Hospital emergency room, dated 48 hours ago," I said. I looked directly at Cambria. Her face had gone from red with rage to a bloodless, waxy white. The official mechanism of injury, as dictated by me to the triage nurse and confirmed by the attending physician, is printed on the band. Maeve looked down at the band. "The print is small. Please read it for the record. Ms. Cole?" I leaned toward the nearest microphone. It reads, "Stepmother beat me." A collective, sharp intake of breath. "That is a lie. She fell," Cambria screamed. "She's hysterical. She fell in the laundry room." "Then let us consult an expert," I said calmly. "Madam Chair, as noted in the evidence package, I am patching in Dr. Allister, the clinical forensic physician who examined me." A new window opened on the main screen. A man in medical scrubs, his face tired but precise, appeared. "Dr. Allister, you are live before the board. Can you confirm the authenticity of your report, dated October 19th? "I can." His voice was dry, digital. "The patient, Eden Cole, presented with injuries including a non-displaced fracture of the 10th rib and significant deep tissue contusions. The bruising pattern," he continued, as the photos I had taken appeared on the screen beside his face, "is indicative of a high-velocity, focused impact against a hard, angular edge. The trauma is entirely inconsistent with a simple fall. It is, however, highly consistent with the patient's report of being forcibly shoved into the corner of a large appliance." This is a conspiracy," Cambria was sputtering, her eyes wild, darting between me, the doctor, and Maeve. "They're in it together. She's paying him." "Enough!" The word was a roar. It was my father. He was on his feet, his entire body shaking, his face a mask of such profound, cold rage that even Cambria was shocked into silence. "I am Arthur Cole," he said, his voice raw, shaking. "I am a shareholder, and his voice cracked, "am her husband." He looked at Cambria, and the love he'd had for her was gone, replaced by a terrible, hollow clarity. "I have seen everything. Cambria, every single transfer, every fake invoice. I held my daughter's x-ray in my hands this afternoon. It is all true." He sank back into his chair. A broken man. The personal betrayal, delivered publicly, was the final, devastating blow. Cambria crumpled into her own chair, her face a mask of disbelief. She had lost him. Maeve Harlan did not pause to let the emotional impact settle. She was a surgeon, and she was closing the wound. Given these findings, both financial and criminal, I asked our external audit partner from Deloitte, who is on site, to be on standby. "Mr. Vance, you are on?" A new face replaced the doctor's, a crisp, serious man in a suit. "Mr. Vance, please advise this board of our immediate obligations." "Madam Chair," his voice was all business, "if this fraud and the subsequent assault by a C-suite officer are substantiated, we are facing a cascade of failures, a material weakness in internal controls, executive fraud, a culture of fear. We would have an immediate and non-negotiable 8K filing obligation to the SEC within 4 business days to disclose matters related to corporate integrity. Failure to do so would expose this company, and every one of you, to shareholder lawsuits and a federal investigation. The threat was clear. Protect her, and you go down with her. Thank you. Mr. Vance, Maeve said. We have the evidence. We have the medical testimony. We have the financial and legal risk. I am now calling for a vote. A motion to immediately suspend Chief Human Resources Officer Cambria Vale for cause and to strip her of all duties, access, and signing authority, effective immediately. And a second motion to activate a full, independent special investigation, led by external counsel, into this matter. All directors in favor. Please log your vote now. On the main screen, the voting interface appeared. One by one, small green lights lit up beside the directors' names. I, a wall of green. Cambria watched the votes stack up. She saw her name, her power, her world, evaporating in real time, the mask of the CHRO, the caring matriarch, the shocked victim. It all burned away, leaving only the raw, cornered animal underneath. No, she screamed, a sound of pure primal negation. She didn't lunge at me. She didn't lunge at my father. She lunged at the wall, at the main media control panel, her hand clawing for the red emergency off switch. She was going to kill the feed, kill the recording, kill the entire meeting. You will not do this to me. Her palm slammed the button. The main screen went black. The directors' faces vanished. The room was plunged into near darkness, lit only by the cold, distant lights of the city, a single, stunned second of silence. Then, a low, electronic beep. On the wall, next to the panel, Cambria was still clawing at. A new, smaller red light blinked to life, a backup light. The main system, designed for hostile takeovers and emergencies, flickered back on. But it was different. It was a stripped-down, read-only interface. The voting results were locked on the screen, a permanent, indelible record. Maeve's voice cut through the darkness, as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. The system has automatically switched to redundant recording and secure backup mode. Ms. Vale, all actions, including your attempt to terminate a board meeting, have been logged. Please return to your seat, or you will be removed. The air in the boardroom had crystallized. The seconds after Cambria's failed lunge at the control panel were perfectly, unnaturally still. The backup system glowed with a cold, unforgiving light, locking her failure onto the screen for all to see. She stood frozen, her hand still hovering near the useless switch, her chest heaving. The hunter was now the specimen, pinned under the glass. It was no longer a meeting, it was a dissection. I took a single step forward, drawing the board's attention back to me. The vote to suspend Ms. Vale is on the record, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. But I would like to introduce one final piece of documentation for the minutes, relevant to the board's next action, which I assume will be termination. Click. A new document replaced the voting results on the main screen. It was a simple, 2-page PDF, the Aurelian Group Code of Ethics and Conduct. This is the Code of Conduct, which every officer is required to sign annually as a condition of their employment, I stated. I zoomed in on a specific paragraph, Section 4, subsection B. The text was highlighted in yellow. I read it aloud. Any officer of this company who engages in acts of physical violence, threats, or intimidation, particularly against a family or household member, has committed a terminable offense. Such actions represent a fundamental breach of the company's stated values and will result in immediate and non-negotiable termination for cause. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. And now, I said, my voice dropping slightly, please direct your attention to the author and signatory of this specific policy. Click. The screen zoomed to the bottom of the last page. There it was, the signature, dated just 6 months prior, a flamboyant, confident scrawl, Cambria Vale. She wrote the rule, I said quietly. The rule that now condemns her. A low murmur went through the room, a wave of shock and dawning finality. Cambria's head snapped towards me, her eyes blazing with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. "You have no proof of violence," she hissed, her voice a ragged shred of its former honeyed tone. "Only the word of a liar and a quack doctor." "Proof," I repeated, as if considering the word. "You're right. A medical report is an interpretation. A photograph is a moment in time. The board deserves more. It deserves to be in the room." I raised the remote again. "Madam Chair, I am now playing an audio file. It was recorded on my phone in the laundry room 2 nights ago. The recording began when the calendar notification for this meeting arrived. It is 32 seconds long." Click. There was no video, only sound, and sound, in the dead silence of that boardroom, was more intimate, more damning, than any image could ever be. First, the sound of normalcy, the rhythmic, muffled thud-thud-thud of the dryer, the faint hiss of rain against a window. Then, Cambria's voice, a low, cold whisper. A very, very dangerous conclusion. My voice, clipped, professional. "It's already logged. It's already been transmitted." A buzz, the sound of my phone's vibration. And then, the sound of a universe breaking, a sudden, sharp intake of breath, the scrape of a stool on tile, and then, a sickening, wet, percussive crack. It was not a slap. It was a heavy, violent impact of flesh and bone against something solid and unyielding. It was a sound of profound damage, a sound that made half the people in the room physically flinch. It was followed by a choked, breathless gasp, mine. And then, her voice, right next to the microphone, a voice made of acid and ice, a voice of pure, venomous threat. "You will let this go. Eden, you will say you slipped. You will stop this. Because if you don't, what I just did to your rib will be nothing compared to what I do to your life." The recording ended. The sound of the dryer's hum cut off into an abyss of absolute silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The faces on the monitors were pale. Horrified masks. They had been in the room. They had heard it. They had heard the crime. Cambria made a sound, a low guttural noise of pure animalistic rage. The facade was not just gone, it had been incinerated. She lunged again, not at me this time, at the audio-visual console, her hands clawing, her face a rictus of hate, intent on physically tearing the machine from the wall. She never made it. Maeve Harlan, who had been watching her with the cold patience of a predator, simply touched a button on her desk console. The main boardroom door hissed open. 2 men entered. They were from Aurelian's in-house executive security team, both dressed in impeccably tailored dark suits. They were large, calm, and moved with a fluid, unnerving economy. They didn't run. They simply materialized, one on each side of Cambria, blocking her path to the console. They didn't touch her. They simply became a human wall. Her frantic momentum died, her hands millimeters from the electronics. "It's over. Cambria," Maeve said, her voice laced with ice. "This isn't over," she shrieked, turning on the guards. "Get out of my way. This is my company." "It was never your company," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "And you should know, the files are always backed up." Click. The main screen flared to life again. It showed the contents of an email. To, personal, encrypted email address. From, C. Vale, Aurelian Group, com, subject, contingency. Body, the files. If this goes sideways, wipe them, all of them. The local drive and the cloud partition, wipe it all, no traces. This email, I explained to the silent board, was sent from Ms. Vale's work computer to a private address, 1 hour after our encounter in the laundry room. It was sent with a self-destruct after reading command. "A deleted email is not evidence," one of the lawyers on screen interjected, his voice cautious. "It is when you recover it from the off-site, rolling disaster recovery server that archives all outgoing mail for 30 days, I replied, not taking my eyes off Cambria. A server she, as CHRO, didn't have the IT clearance to even know existed, but I, as head of compliance, did. Checkmate. There was a movement at the side of the room. It was my father. He stood up slowly, his face etched with a grief so profound it seemed to age him before our eyes. He walked to the main table, his steps heavy, deliberate. He stood beside Cambria's empty chair. He raised his left hand. With the thumb and forefinger of his right, he took hold of his wedding ring, a simple, solid band of platinum. He twisted it, once, over the knuckle, then he pulled it off. He held it for a moment, then he turned his hand over and opened his fingers. He placed the ring on the polished mahogany surface. It wasn't a loud sound. It was not a clang. It was a small, dry, final sound, a little tick of metal on wood that seemed to echo in the vast, silent room. The sound of a vow breaking. The sound of an ending. Cambria watched the ring settle on the table. That small, simple act seemed to break her in a way the data, the audio, and the security guards had not. A single, choked sob escaped her lips. Aurelian's general counsel, a man who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Madam Chair," he said, his voice grave. "In light of this overwhelming evidence, I must formally advise the board to accept Ms. Vale's suspension as a resignation. Effective immediately, we must temporarily suspend her signing authority, revoke all digital and physical access, and issue a hold order on all her corporate devices and files pending the independent investigation." "The motion has been made," Maeve said. "The original vote for suspension stands and is hereby ratified, 9-0. Cambria Vale is no longer an officer of this company." She looked at the general counsel. "File the 8K with the SEC. We will issue the press release and a company-wide memo by 9 a.m. tomorrow." I remained silent. My part was done. The machine was now in motion, and it would grind forward, with or without me. The final move, the one that would salt the earth of her reputation forever, was already in play. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't my evidence. It was four simple, devastating words in a public filing that would be attached to her name for the rest of her life. Matters related to integrity. "Ms. Vale," Maeve said. Her voice was not cruel, just final. "These gentlemen will escort you from the building. Your personal effects will be couriered to you tomorrow." The two guards moved. One opened the boardroom door. The other gestured for Cambria to precede him. She stood there for a moment, a woman adrift, her power, her husband, her career, all of it gone in the space of 30 minutes. She looked at me, her eyes empty now, burned out. Then she turned, and with a shred of her former dignity, she walked towards the door. She stepped out into the hallway. The large glass door began to swing shut behind her. For a final, fleeting second, I saw her reflection. The glass distorted her image, warping her expensive suit and her defiant posture into something broken and grotesque. The door hissed shut, sealing her out of the world she had built. The lock engaged with a soft, definitive thud. The glass door hissed shut, the sound of its final pneumatic sigh echoing in the vast, empty corridor of the 28th floor. The boardroom was now a sealed box of consequences, the red recording light no longer visible. The only sound left was the low, constant rush of the HVAC system, a sterile, mechanical shushing that sounded like a distant, lifeless ocean. The hallway was a long canyon of beige carpet and brushed steel wall panels, lit by recessed lights that cast pools of cold, blue-white illumination on the floor, leaving the spaces in between in shadow. We were alone. The aftermath. My father didn't move toward the elevator. He slumped, his momentum gone, and leaned his back against the wall. He was no longer the enraged shareholder or the betrayed husband. He was just an old man, hollowed out, his expensive suit suddenly looking too large for him. He scrubbed a hand over his face, and when he let it drop, I saw his eyes were red, the capillaries broken. He didn't make a sound. I walked to the small, unmanned reception desk that sat in an alcove by the elevators. A single, perfect orchid sat in a vase. Beside it was a silver box of tissues. I pulled one out and walked back to him. I held it out. He stared at the small, white, embossed piece of paper as if he didn't understand what it was for. Then he took it, his strong, calloused fingers clumsy, and pressed it to his eyes. "I chose to believe you late," he said. His voice was a ruin, a low, gravelly rasp that bore no resemblance to the man who had picked me up from the airport, the man who had built bridges. "God, Edie, I chose to be blind, and I am so sorry." It was the apology I had needed to hear for 5 years, the validation. But now that it was here, it felt small, inadequate. It was a fact, like any other. "Nobody wins in violence, Dad," I replied, my voice as flat and quiet as the hallway. "Only the people who stop it." I wasn't offering forgiveness. I was closing the file. This was the end of the event. He nodded, absorbing that. He looked down the long corridor, toward the glass-walled office that had been hers, now just a dark, empty rectangle at the end of the hall. "Do you—" He had to stop, to clear his throat. "Do you need to make the other part public? The family part?" He was still trying to find the perimeter, to see what else was about to be destroyed. He was asking if I would publicly name her as my abuser, beyond the boardroom. "I don't have to," I said. It was already public the moment it hit the cash flow. The assault just verified the data. The fraud is the story. The rest is just the motive. He understood. The professional crime was the lever. The personal one was just the fulcrum. He pushed himself off the wall, standing straighter. I could see the steel returning to his spine, but it was a different, colder kind of steel. The steel of a man facing a demolition. "I'll resign from the advisory board," he said, his voice firming up. "It's the right thing to do. It will help Maeve. It will help the company look clean. If I'm gone—" "No," I said, my compliance mind clicking back into place, overriding the part of me that was a daughter. "Your resignation would look like an admission of complicity. It would imply you knew. You stay. You're the victim. Just like the shareholders. The husband who was deceived. You're the face of the people-first culture she betrayed." He stared at me, his eyes wide with a new, dawning understanding. He had been thinking of honor. I was thinking of strategy. "You should recommend," I continued, "that the new special committee they're forming retain a completely independent, external forensic accounting firm, not Deloitte. Someone new, someone with no prior relationship to Aurelian. They need to ring-fence the entire wellness fund, audit every single transaction she ever signed, and report directly to the SEC." He nodded slowly, taking it in. "An independent investigation," he repeated. He was seeing the path forward, the procedural steps that would carry him through the next few days. He reached out, his hand grasping mine. He meant it as a gesture of connection, of solidarity, but the hand he grabbed was my left one. His fingers closed over the faint, yellowing bruises on my wrist, the ones her grip had left, the ones the doctor had photographed. He flinched. His hand recoiled as if he had touched a hot stove. He looked down at my wrist, at the faint marks, and then back up at my face, his own contorted in a mask of sudden, fresh agony. The data in the boardroom was one thing, the physical. Lasting evidence of that violence on his daughter's skin was another. It was a truth he couldn't process. He let my hand drop. He turned away from me, breaking the contact, and fumbled in his jacket pocket for his phone. He turned his back, facing the wall, a man suddenly needing a private space in a public hallway. He punched a number in, his thumb jabbing at the screen. "David," he said, his voice hard, all business. "It's Arthur. I need you. I'm at the office. Yes, it's about Cambria. No, it's over. I need you to file, tomorrow morning, And I need you to meet me tonight. Yes, right now. It's bad. I watched his back, the set of his shoulders, the man who had protected me my entire life, now making the call to his divorce lawyer. I felt two things at once, a profound, hollow lightness. The burden I had carried for months, the secret of the fraud, the secret of the violence. It was gone. It was out. It was done. And at the same time, I felt a weight so crushing I could barely breathe. The cost of it, the wreckage, the sight of my father, a good man, a decent man, being dismantled, piece by piece, by the truth I had forced into the light. I slipped my hands into the pockets of my blazer. My right fingers brushed against the small, silver rectangle of the USB drive, the cold, hard, logical data, the irrefutable proof. My left fingers brushed against the small, stiff, plastic loop of the hospital bracelet I had taken from the table, the personal, physical, undeniable trauma. Two halves of the same, terrible story, the evidence and the wound. They clicked against each other in the darkness of my pocket. A quiet, final confirmation. Maeve Harlan did not adjourn the meeting in the boardroom. The directors, both physical and virtual, were dismissed with a curt nod, while the general counsel and a team from IT security began the process of corporate exorcism. The air was thick with the low, urgent murmur of legal and technical jargon. I did not wait. My father did not wait. We simply stood and walked out, leaving them to dismantle the life Cambria had built. We did not speak as we rode the executive elevator down from the 32nd floor to the 28th. The car was silent, paneled in dark, polished wood that reflected our faces like a murky pond. My father stared at his own reflection, at the image of a man he no longer recognized. I stared straight ahead at the closing doors. Back on the 28th floor, the long, empty corridor was no longer a place of transit. It was the antechamber to the new reality. My father was finishing his call with his lawyer, his voice a low, hard monotone. I walked to the main reception desk, the one near the boardroom, where a single, stoic-looking security guard now stood, his presence a quiet confirmation that the building was in a state of controlled lockdown. He nodded at me, his face impassive. "Ms. Cole." From the pocket of my blazer, I removed the white plastic hospital bracelet. I laid it on the polished granite of the desk, in the cold, overhead light. It looked small, pathetic, almost insignificant, a piece of medical trash, and yet it had been the fulcrum that had moved the world. "This is evidence," I said, my voice clear and steady. "It needs to be entered into the chain of custody for the board's special investigation." The guard produced a clear plastic evidence bag and a logbook. He used a pair of tweezers to pick up the bracelet and placed it carefully inside the bag, sealing it with a tamper-proof sticker. He then pushed the logbook toward me. "Please sign and date," he said. I took the pen. I was signing my name next to a description of the item. Hospital admission band, dated October 18th, Exhibit G. I added the time, 7:48 p.m. My signature was firm, a single, unbroken line. I was not a victim signing a complaint. I was a compliance officer closing a case file. The procedure was clean. The procedure was absolute. The procedure was the only thing that made sense. Ding. The sound was soft, almost musical. It came from the security guard's desk phone, an email notification. Then it came from my own work phone, which I had just powered back on. A soft, unified chorus of dings began to echo from the offices down the hall as the executive leadership, the ones who hadn't been in the meeting, received the memo. The email, I knew, would be brutally simple. Maeve Harlan was a woman who did not waste words on sentiment. To Aurelian Senior Leadership from Maeve Harlan, Independent Chair of the Board. Subject: Urgent Leadership Update. Body: Cambria. Val has been terminated for cause, effective immediately. Her employment with the Aurelian Group has ended. An independent investigation into matters of governance and conduct is underway. Further instructions will follow. Do not reply to this email. As I was reading the copy on my own phone, the security guard was typing at his console. "Just got the kill order," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Revoking all physical and digital access. Seavale is now a ghost." On his monitor, I could see him moving through a series of windows. He clicked a button. Access revoked. Cambria's keycard was now a useless piece of plastic. He clicked another. Email account frozen. Her inbox, her calendar, her entire digital life's work at Aurelian was now a sealed tomb. He clicked a third time. Remove from global address list. And just like that, she was gone. Systematically, surgically, and completely erased. My father walked over, his own phone now dark in his hand. He looked at the evidence bag on the counter, at my signature in the logbook. He looked tired, but the hollowed-out grief was gone, replaced by a quiet, grim resolve. He didn't reach for me. He didn't offer a hug or a comforting touch. The space between us was still charged with the 5 years of his blindness, with the brutal clarity of the past few hours. An embrace would have been a lie, an attempt to smooth over a chasm that was still raw and deep. Instead, he looked me directly in the eye. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was the steadiest it had been all day. "Thank you for choosing the truth." It was, I realized, the highest compliment he could pay. He was a man of structures, of things that were real and true. I had not chosen family. I had not chosen revenge. I had chosen the fundamental principle upon which his entire world was built. I just nodded. There was nothing else to say. I turned and walked to the elevator bank. I pressed the down button, the light haloed in green. The doors slid open with a soft whoosh. I stepped inside. I turned to face the front. The polished steel doors slid shut, and for a moment, before the car began to move, I saw my own reflection. A woman in a dark suit, her face pale, her expression neutral. The face was no longer shaking. The eyes were no longer holding back a storm. They were just still. The face of a person who had finished a long and difficult job. The elevator began its smooth, silent descent. 28 floors, a journey from the pinnacle of corporate power back down to the earth. I pulled my personal phone from my pocket. I opened a messaging app, a secure one I used with my own compliance team, the ones who had trusted me, who had helped me track the data, who had worked in silence for months, suspecting, but never knowing the full story. I typed 2 words. Meeting adjourned. I hit send. No more explanation was needed. They would understand. It was not the end of a meeting. It was the end of a war. It was the end of the lies. The elevator slowed. A soft, musical bell chimed. Ding. The light for the lobby level was lit. The doors slid open. The main lobby of the Aurelian Tower was a vast, cathedral-like space, all marble and glass. It was nearly empty at this hour, save for a few security guards and cleaning staff, but on the massive, wall-mounted screen behind the main reception desk, the one that usually displayed glowing marketing images of happy employees and the People First slogan, something new was on display. It was a text document, a draft. The header was stark. Draft. For immediate SEC filing. Form 8A. And below it, a few bullet points. Resignation of Principal Officer. Item 5.02. Results of matters submitted to a vote of security holders. Item 5.07. Matters related to corporate integrity and governance. Item 4.01 as required. It was real. It was happening. It was now a part of the public record, a permanent scar on the history of the company. I walked toward the main revolving doors, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The doors spun, pushing a wave of cool night air into the sterile lobby. I stepped through, out onto the street, out into Braxton Vale. The sun was gone, but the city was alive with light, with the rush of traffic, with the distant sound of sirens and the hum of a million lives moving forward. The air was real. It smelled of street food and exhaust, and the faint, sweet scent of approaching rain. The story ends here. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect. Share your thoughts on Eden's journey. And if you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like for extra support. Hit that hype button to help this story be heard by so many more.